We are at the digital studios at CTC, or Cape Town Conversation 2024. Let me begin by giving a brief introduction about myself. I was a career diplomat and later the Deputy National Security Advisor of India. I was then in cyber commissions, one on internet governance and one on the stability of cyberspace. I was a fellow, a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, and I'm now just a visiting fellow because I now live in Bangalore, which is interestingly enough the hub, I would say, of startups in India. I would like to introduce my fellow panelists. There is a Siksit Bhatta on my right. He is the founder of the first ride-hailing application in Nepal and is now working on digital public infrastructure. And here I have Soline Kaufmann from France, who is the co-founder of Agora AI, and which predicts droughts, a very important subject for particularly for developing countries. Let me say a little bit about India's experience with uh, entrepreneurs and the startup culture to begin with. As I said, Bangalore is really the hub of startup enterprises in India. It's been hugely successful. I know a number of young entrepreneurs myself and have always encouraged them. And I feel that the ecosystem in Bangalore is uniquely situated to encourage startups. And I say this because we are home to several very important educational institutions. We have the Indian Institute of Science. We also have the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore. And we have a whole ecosystem that's really devoted to promoting entrepreneurship. And we take great pride in Bangalore in being that hub of entrepreneurship. It's relatively easy to get finance for startups in Bangalore. And therefore, I think that's why it's earned the name of the startup capital of India. Now, I want to ask both of you, given your experiences, and let me begin with you, Siksit, that how can we encourage youth-led startups? Um, and what would your advice be to young people who want to begin a startup?
Yeah, it's great to be here, and it's wonderful to be a part of this panel. I still remember when I came to a boarding school back in 1988 from a rural place in Nepal, and I was placed in Kathmandu, in the capital city. So when I came to the boarding school, people asked, where do you get milk from? And most of the kids, we have a similar culture in Nepal and India. They said it comes from dairy. Because as a young kid who was growing up in a rural part of Nepal, knew that milk actually came from cows.
Yeah.
And you had to milk them, right? Now, the point that I'm trying to make is, if you look at the way urbanization has happened in last 40, 50 years, I think there's a sense of disconnect in the youth about the material world. For example, you and me know that the milk does not come from dairy or department stores. It comes from the cows,
Yeah.
right? We know how rice grain is made. We know how buildings are constructed. At least we know how the foundations of buildings are made and how the cements are laid. But in the last 20 years, something really exciting happened, was the urbanization moved from the industrial urbanization to the services-led urbanization. So kids of our children's generation, they're disconnected from the fact that they do not know how we produce rice, or they have very limited knowledge of how synthetic fertilizers are made, which means that they're not aware of the kind of food security problems The problems of the material world that needs to be solved if we have to solve things like hunger. The problems of material world of mobility and urban mobility and transportation. So they're really disconnected from the material world. So my advice would be that, and what we've seen is that the entire technology that's been built in the last 20, 30 years uh, has been a part of that disconnect that comes from the West and the Silicon Valley, right? So they've created technology for the sake of technology. And these technology would have billions of dollars of valuation. Like, I can't imagine and understand why Angry Bird is valued so highly, right? Or why Facebook is made, and then they try to retrofit the technology to say that, hey, we are changing the world by solving these problems.
Right.
But what we need to do is we need to tie up technology with the material world. Okay. So, for example, if we think about climate change, for example, one of the ways, one of the largest consumer of fossil fuel is synthetic fertilizers. The amount of natural gas it uses is huge, right? But Africa has more mouths to feed. So how can we use this technology to reduce the waste of food that happens in Europe and maybe produce more in Africa, right? So how can you tie up this digital technology through startups, the AIs, with the real problems of the material world? I think that's something that we need to focus on, because if you look at the youth today, I think there is a sense of an existential crisis that comes if they don't find the latest model of iPhone. But they're not aware that we are running out of synthetic fertilizer, and at least the amount of energy that it requires and how to solve that. So I think we need to have more discourse, more conversations about how you tie up these two worlds of digital and technology to the real problems of the material world and combine. And that, I think, could lead to a newer wave of innovation that could come from a global south, unlike that has come from the West and the Silicon Valley, where we fret over not having the latest model of iPhone, or if your Angry Bird hangs sometimes, and then you have an existential crisis.
Well, that leads very nicely into my question to you, Celine, because I know that in France, you've the co-founder of Agora AI. You've used technology, you've used artificial intelligence, and you are able to predict droughts. Now, I want you to tell me a little bit about your experience. How did you harness technology to tackle this very important social economic issue, which has devastating consequences for the global south, and in fact for every country, because we've had a lot of floods in Europe as well, which have had devastating consequences. How do you also scale up global impact of these technologies?
Yeah, I want to maybe bounce back a bit on what you said earlier. I definitely, believe that there are technologies that are being developed for the sake of technologies, but the new generation of entrepreneurs that need to come about and that need to emerge need to focus on the hard, difficult problems, and those are in the social, environmental, and health sectors. And technology has really enabled us to harness innovation in order to solve those challenges. And to your point, technology can be used to develop maybe shallow companies, if we want to call them that way, who are heavily valued. And sometimes we ask ourselves why. But technology can also be harnessed in such a beautiful, impactful way. And if you're looking at the way it's enabled startups and entrepreneurs to strive, well, what do entrepreneurs need nowadays? They need technology, they need talent, they need capital, they need customers. And on all those four elements, technology has played a role in accelerating, outreach. So if we're looking at technology, it's now easy to develop no-code or low-code solutions. So entrepreneurs, the barrier to access to technology is lowered for any type of person who wants to develop and design products. Same with talent. We can now tap and access talent all around the world. Customers, social media enables us to outreach and reach out to our customers in a way that is quite unique now, because we bypass traditional media and we can have direct conversation with our customers. And I assume with your company it was the case, and it would be interesting to delve into it. And capital is the same. Like, we have access to capital locally, but also abroad now, and that's thanks to, you know, again, social media, the different communication, the fact that investors who are coming from different regions now are looking at companies in other regions as well, because they see the opportunity for innovation, growth in those new markets. So all of these aspects mean that it's easier now for any individual to go into entrepreneurship, and it's literally a question of will, truly, and a question of, you know, focusing on the right problems and finding the right solutions for them. What we're doing with Agora AI is hopefully that. We've decided to tackle a massive problem, which is the lack of water in different countries. And so we're leveraging artificial intelligence to predict future droughts. We're still at an R&D phase, but we're hopeful that this technology will help the private and the public sector really better understand when we're going to be impacted by lack of water, the impact it has on economic development, as well as, you know, personal development, and seize the opportunity to puts the right policies in place thanks to the knowledge.
How about global impact? You know, we talked about that also. How do you scale up globally?
Well, it's hard. Like, our company is still at very early stage, but being able to develop a solution that can go and strive in different markets is truly, you know, a big challenge. I don't know how it was for your company, but you have, you know, not only a question of having being able to access the capital to help you scale, but you also need to speak the language of the customer locally, and then you may face, you know, different regulations that are different from your historical markets, and all of these challenges are, I'd say, traditional challenges that any company face as they scale. If you're in the infrastructure business, I think it's different from if you're in the software business. But it's very much a question of, you know, doing your market research, getting the right funding, the right network, and go about it.
Okay. Could I? Yeah. Do you have any ideas?
Look, at the end of the day, when it comes to innovation, it's about ideas, and it's about an entrepreneurial spirit. But when it comes to scale, it's about money, hands down, right? Like, for example, it's like if you're doing a startup and if you compare it with McDonald's, it's very easy to make a burger better than McDonald's. And McDonald's burgers are, you know, not that great anyways, but making a burger better than McDonald's and creating McDonald's are two different things. Creating McDonald's is about scale in operations, scale in branding, scale in the delivery and the service quality and everything. So that is where money is required. And unfortunately, that money is stacked up in Silicon Valley, and probably people in the global south might not have the access to those resources of scaling that impact. And that is where most of the challenges actually comes from. And as an entrepreneur, I think you might have faced a similar challenge that when you get that investment, you'll also have to sell off some of your soul and give the control to the investors, who then want to multiply returns rather than multiplying impact, right? Just think about if Albert Einstein was an entrepreneur and not a scientist, and if he was invested upon by a venture capitalist, would we have those theories and the kind of things that those theories led to? Probably not, right? So I think we are at a stage in history where probably rather than scaling the impact globally, we need to focus on solving our local problems with local technology. Because the socio-cultural context is different in different places. So for example, I was in Hanoi recently, and it's very similar to India, where the local commerce is done between mom and pop stores with whom you have a close relationship, right? So that's how the commerce is done. It's between people to people. You just walk to the street, buy a bottle of milk or buy a couple of eggs. And but if you look at the model of Amazon, it comes from the socio-cultural and the infrastructural context of the West, where you assemble all these products on a big scale, like Walmart. And Amazon is nothing but a software version of Walmart. So what's happened over the years is that we've tried to copy those models in the global south, like places like Hanoi, places like India, and it doesn't work. So probably I think every country and every place has its own social structure, its own urban infrastructure, its own social upbringings, and the kind of relationship that we enjoy. And it's rather to accept that technology is a means and not an end. And it's about technology that could facilitate that socio-cultural habit and the behaviors, rather than putting one technology that can encompass the global culture. And that, I think, is doomed to fail in future, I believe, if we don't do it right.
Yeah. Well, if I can come in here, I just want to say that we just have about 5 minutes left now of our session. So I want to ask you, what role can governments, investors, development organizations play in creating a supply a sort of supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurs? And how do startups contribute to inclusive growth? I think the inclusive growth you've pretty much covered in your previous remarks. But how do we get to the underserved communities? And what can governments and investors and development organizations do? If you could very briefly respond to this, maybe I'll start with you, Celine.
Yes, definitely. I think governance need to take away certain, barriers, legal barriers for innovation. In certain cases, it's, the world has been constructed with a certain level of governance, which is very important. But when innovation comes, the role of innovation is to disrupt, right? And certain laws are just not, fitted for the growth of innovation. So definitely looking at how to enhance innovation rather than curtail it. Certain tax breaks and financial incentives for entrepreneurs are super important. And I'd say, public investment as well. When it comes to investors, I very much, agree and align with your comments that there is a need for investors to understand the needs of the local market as well, and invest in the opportunities locally before potentially going and investing abroad. But I think two other points when it comes to investors. It's very important for early stage finance to exist. So we usually speak about venture capital, private equity. We hardly ever speak about business angels and the communities that of investment that need to, exist in order to take risks and invest in early stage entrepreneurs. So business angel community is super important. And investors also need to look at social and environmental topics, not just focus on money.
And to you now.
Yeah, I agree with your points on the government thing, so I don't have anything to add. But in terms of scale and inclusiveness, look, I read through this book by C.K. Prahlad, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, and I really echo that part of that book, which was written almost 30 years ago, where he says that the global economy of the global South can thrive when 1 billion people in India and countries, economies like that, can become micro producers and micro consumers. Right?
So, firstly, let me say we need a supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurs. Secondly, it's easier for entrepreneurs these days because of social media. People in the global South don't have enough investment and often have to compromise their own visions of their enterprise to attract investors. So you need early stage finance angles, which I think is a point that Soline made. You need to solve local problems locally. And, we call these kirana stores, the small store around the shop around the corner, so to speak. And when you support those stores rather than supporting Amazon or huge supermarkets, you are really growing your local small enterprises. That's very important too. Governments need to be more sensitive, not lay down too many harsh rules for entrepreneurs, and they also need to give them tax rebates and other concessions to encourage the growth of an ecosystem conducive for entrepreneurship. And investors, we certainly need the early stage financial angels to come forward, the angel investors as they're called. And finally, we need to look at the bottom of the pyramid and realize, in the words of C.K. Prahalad, that if 1 billion people buy 1 rupee sachets of shampoo, they create a fantastic market. And I think that is the point that we really need to look at scaling up in terms of how do you reach the underserved communities? How do you benefit growth through your own ecosystem? So with that, I think we've sort of covered the subject of how we develop entrepreneurship, how we can make for a more equitable world system, and how we can encourage entrepreneurs as they do set up their startups. So with that, I'll sign off here, and thank you all for listening. And I hope you've come away with some ideas of what we can do to encourage entrepreneurs all over the world, but particularly in the global south. Thank you.